All right, we have learned some HTML, we've learned some CSS, and we've learned that we probably never want to actually have to deal with styling a page because it is impossible, because it is complicated, because we have more important things to do than spend our lives making a nice looking web page, maybe. So luckily, for those people who are too busy or too lazy to get really good at design and CSS and web stuff, there is something called Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is what's called a CSS framework. CSS framework. Now, what a framework does is basically all of your heavy lifting for you. It's done all of the stuff that you need, all of the stuff that's typical to style a page to make it look nice, so you don't have to think. You just use Bootstrap and magically all of your web pages look kind of the same. They look like this, but they work well. They're responsive, so they'll look nice on mobile, things like that. So we are going to learn Bootstrap, or we're going to learn a little bit of Bootstrap, and you'll run from there in order to build, let's say, a portfolio or a story piece or anything like that. So if we look at our web page that we have right now, it's just a pretty boring, normal web page. It has tags on here. There has not been any styling, just H1, H3, couple P tags, and a button. Let's add another button to there. Beautiful. So in order to add a Bootstrap to the page, Bootstrap is, like we said, a CSS framework. So you would think if you want to add more CSS to the page, we're going to add a style block, and then we're going to type a bunch of Bootstrap stuff inside. That's actually not what we're going to do. When I said there were 3 ways to add CSS to a page, and this was the second best way, Bootstrap is going to use the first best way, which is have an external file that we kind of link off to. So I'm going to scroll down on the Bootstrap page, and then this thing that you can't read, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to clean it up a little bit so that it looks more normal. Okay. So remember before when I said that the link tag isn't a link tag, it's an A tag whenever we want to make a link? Here, I'll add one in here. So what this tag is it says it's a link tag, but what it really means is, hey web browser, go out into the world and download this file. It's a style sheet, it's CSS code, and apply that to the page. If we take a look at this actual file, it looks like this, which you can't read, but you can kind of read, right? Like, this is something that has the class of call SM8, and then it starts from this curly brace and goes to that curly brace. So we can kind of read this if we have to, but it's painful. The reason why it's so painful is it's been minified. If you see the .min in the URL, one of the things that people don't like is having to download a bunch of extra space and a bunch of extra, people hitting enter in between lines. So before they put things like CSS up on the internet, they will minify it to make it smaller. It's harder to read, it's faster to download. It's not honestly really faster to download, but it's okay. It's faster to download. Okay, so this is all of the CSS that is going to be applied to the page, which is a decent chunk of CSS. So I'm going to save here. I'm going to go back to our file and I'm going to refresh. So, bam, there we go. Those buttons automatically look a little bit fancier. The text size changes, the text font changes, and it kind of comes together. But this is not the real magic of Bootstrap. This gets us a little bit of the way. The magic part of Bootstrap starts when we add in classes to different elements. So we have this button. If we want to make a fancier kind of button, let's go to documentation and we'll search for buttons. Hey, components, buttons, great. Look at all these fun buttons. This is so exciting. Oh, and look at how they figure out what the button should look like. They use classes. So if we want to make our button this bright blue one, we give it two classes, the class of BTN and the class of BTN primary. So let's do that. Actually, let's do the danger one, which is button danger, right? Just because it looks more fun. So class equals BTN, BTN, danger. Save, refresh. Beautiful, so much fun. But why is this button square and this button round? So the reason is there's usually a base class that you need to apply to something, and in this case it's BTN. So to get a default button, class BTN looks terrible. What kind of button do we want to make that be? Light, dark, let's make it button light. And now, there we go, button warning. So you can spend forever fooling around with this stuff. No, I like light better, let's be honest. So there are a billion different things that you can add. Carousels, which are those things where images slide by. Never use them, they're terrible. A jumbotron, you can have like a really big text call out at the top of your page, and you just have to copy their code. So you scroll through here seeing things that you want, and then you just take them, and that's pretty much how it works. But the part that ends up being the most useful about Bootstrap is the layout stuff that they will do for the page. So when you are working on a web page, there is something called, let's see, columns, web pages. In theory, every web page is built out of columns. There we go. So when you have a web page, all of the content is broken up into 12 columns. It's called the 12-column grid. And when you want to put things into different columns, maybe you have a small sidebar on the side and then a larger content area on the right, you just say, take 3 of those columns and then draw me something here, and then 3 of those columns and draw me something here. So what we're going to do is we are going to take what we've made here and we're going to maybe throw them into some different columns to kind of get that idea of a portfolio, where maybe you have 5 columns of samples about what your work looks like, and then people can click through to other pages. So here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to use a div tag, and we're going to put it around everything. Then I'm going to indent, even though you don't have to, it will end up looking, your code will look nicer and be more readable if you do. So I'm going to save this and refresh, and what does the div tag do? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why does the div tag not do anything? Because it's not really a tag that is supposed to do anything. It just stands for division, so just like a section of the page. So imagine this is a section tag. It's kind of just a default tag you use when there's not anything that you could really use. So what's going to happen is we are going to say class equals container. Save, refresh. This automatically adds a little bit of padding on the left and right hand side of our page. Why does it do that? Where does that come from? It comes from Bootstrap. So Bootstrap just has a list of 1,000,001 different classes. How did I know to use container? Because I read the documentation 100 years ago, so I kind of know how it's set up. So when you're building a page with Bootstrap, it is built on rows. Let's see if we can find the grid system, blah, blah, blah. So this is a row, and then it has 3 columns in it. And you can see here, div class equals container. Inside of that, you have a div class equals row. So let's add that in there. Div class equals row. And then we have div class equals call sm. So the above example creates 3 equal width columns on small, medium, large, and extra large devices using our predefined grid classes. Great, that's pretty exciting. We only want 1 column right now, so div class equals call sm. We could also just do call, but we're not going to talk about why right now. So we save that, we refresh, and it looks exactly the same. Absolutely nothing has changed. That's because we only have 1 column. So if we wanted to add another column, I could do this. Let's say we're going to add a sidebar. So this is going to be our first column. This is going to be our second column. They're both inside of the same row. I'm going to save, refresh, and there I go. Look at that. It's beautiful. It's not beautiful. It's terrible. Why is this terrible? Well, a sidebar is usually smaller than the rest of the content. So let's make it a little bit smaller. The way that we make it smaller is we say how many of those 12 columns we want it to take up. Because right now, it's 6 for our sidebar and 6 for our main content. So in order to change that, we're going to do call sm3, call sm9. We just need these 2 numbers to add up to 12. So the first 3 columns are going to be dedicated to this guy here, and the second 3 columns, or the next 9 columns are going to be dedicated to this guy here. Refresh, and there we go. Looks a little bit nicer. But this is probably not what we want to do. I would say what we're looking for is we want to have a big header up top that says, hey, I'm a cool person. And then we do one story with maybe an image over here, another story, another story, another story. So we want this main header to go up before these 2 columns. So what we want is another row. Right now, this is where our first row begins. So let's just add another row right before it. Put an H1 in there. Save, refresh. All right, that looks right, but there's one thing we forgot to do, and that is add in our column. Every time you use a row, you should have at least 1 column. I'm going to change this to welcome to my amazing portfolio. Save, refresh, and there we go. Maybe we want to add a little bit more text under here. Blah, blah. Get a little spacing in there. Yeah, it's fine. It'll be okay. Now, this sidebar here, I want to add a picture. What's the picture going to be of? A cat. Always a cat. I have a picture, meow.jpg. We're going to throw meow.jpg in there. So how do you make an image? img tag. img src equals meow.jpg. Save, refresh. Oh, it's way too big. How do I make it fluid? I don't know the answer to that. Bootstrap, fluid image. We want it to take up the whole size that it can. So I click through and it says, images in Bootstrap are made responsive with .img fluid. Now what that means is it will always shrink or grow to the size of the container that it is in, to the size of the column that it is in. So when it's going out of the side of this column here, oh no, we're going to change it to img fluid. Now, when it says img fluid, you might think, all right, I'm going to cut and paste this. Class equals that, save it, refresh. Doesn't work. The reason why it doesn't work is because of this period. This period is not part of the class name. The name of the class is img fluid. img fluid. This dot is the CSS way of talking about classes, or the shorthand way of talking about classes. So you can see down here, class equals image fluid. That's their nice example. So now that I've gotten rid of that period, I can save it, refresh, and there we go. Looks good. So if I clean this up a little bit, I don't need a main header here. Here is one of my articles. Save, refresh. Now, if I'm like, this is an article about murders, I don't want to just have a normal boring link here. I want a cool button that is also a link to somewhere else. What if I told you href equals, we'll send it to Google because I don't have anywhere else to send it. Here is my project, right? That's what we could do. I'll put that inside of a p tag. Here's my project, but I want that to look like a button. So it turns out that if I take this A and then I add class equals btn, btn danger, so add another attribute to it for the class, suddenly it looks exactly like a button. So when you're using Bootstrap, you can usually apply these classes to different things to get kind of the same element. Because it doesn't matter that this is a button tag here. What matters is the fact that it has btn, btn danger, btn, btn danger. Classes are the same, so they end up looking the same. Save, refresh, beautiful. So in theory, all I need to do to build a somewhat decent looking website is copy and paste. Let's see, where does this row begin and end? This is the container, so this is the row. Copy, paste, 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 refresh, and there we go. We got a nice bunch of articles all in a row, and a somewhat halfway kind of respectable website. Now, if I wanted it to look a little bit fancier, if I wanted other things to go on here, I could poke around on the Bootstrap website. I could go under components and just kind of scroll around. So we'll see things like this, which is an alert box, which looks kind of fun. I can add an alert to the top of my page, and I could say, let's see, I'll put it inside of this column, and my alert will say, currently looking for a job in starting summer 2018. Contact me at, js4571@columbia.edu. And then everyone will want to hire me because I'll have a nice thing up at the top of the page. If I want to make this an actual link, the link will be ahref equals mail to js4571@columbia.edu. And you say, what? That's not a link. And I say, it is. And you say, why? And I say, that's just the rules. That's just how it works. What else can we find that's kind of fun on here? Link color, who cares? We could do a larger alert like that. Some of these things you need JavaScript to use. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will. Buttons, cards, carousels if we want a bunch of images, drop downs. You can have very nice looking forms. Granted, we're not creating like a web product, so we probably don't need them. Generally speaking, you're just going to use rows, columns, images, buttons, and then as time goes on, we'll add more and more and more to that. So if we look at the documentation, when they say they have a starter template here, so this is the starter template for Bootstrap, and this will just give you basically an empty page. This is a lot more complicated than what we started off with. We just started off with a few H1s and some H2s and things like this. That's because we've been doing HTML wrong since the very, very beginning. Or not wrong, but just not the proper way. So this would be the proper way to do it, where you have a head section, you have a body section. The body section is for things that the user will see, and the head section is for stuff that the browser will read. So take a look at this. Right now, the title of this page, let me close all these. The title of this page is Introduction-Bootstrap. The title of our page up here is bootstrap.html. How do we change that? Well, we use something called the title tag, and the title tag goes inside of the head tag. So let's steal some of this code, apply it to our page, and become a little bit more proper. So we're going to go up to the top, and the first thing we're going to steal is doctype HTML. So what this means is, hey, browser, we are going to be using HTML5. There are other kinds of HTML, but this one is specifically HTML5. What's the difference? There's not really that much of a difference. You'll be fine. Just use it. Then we say HTML lang equals en. You can change your language to be whatever it could be, as long as you know what the 2-character code abbreviation is. This tag means we are about to create some HTML, which seems kind of silly because we just said, hey, we're using HTML5, and obviously we're using HTML because we're using all of these angle brackets, but I don't know, I didn't make it. And then we're going to throw in the head tag. So the head tag is stuff that is informative to the browser and not things that get displayed to the user. So this code right here is, as we talked about before, saying, hey browser, go download this file, download this CSS file and apply it to the page. It'll go grab that file, it'll apply it to the page. Even though the result of that is something that is shown to the user by way of styling the page, this is really just stuff that belongs to the browser, not the user. So we're going to keep this in the head. When we get down here, this all becomes things that the user should see. They should see this container with rows and columns and text inside. So we're going to end the head section right here and start the body section right here. So you do the head, things just for the browser, and the body, things that are for the user. So I'm going to indent a little bit more. And then just before the end, I'm going to close the body tag and then close the HTML tag, just like they did here. Close the body tag, close the HTML tag. In their code, they also added a bit of JavaScript near the end. I'm just going to ignore that right now. That's fine. Scroll back up. Let's copy a few of their tags. Copy these two here. So this tag here means, hey, even though we're using the English language, even though this is an English language page, we're going to reserve the right to use characters from any language. So we could put Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Russian or whatever on here and it would render correctly. This line here basically says, hey, display the page correctly when it's on mobile and things like that. This one is kind of specific to the way Bootstrap is set up. Save, refresh, nothing broke, everything looks the same. Now what we want to add is the title tag right here. So the title tag, you would think a title tag is like an H1 or an H2 or an H3 and that it's a big headline, but it's not. The title tag goes in the head because the head is stuff that's just for the browser. And when you use the title tag, what it's going to do is update the title that shows up here and shows up in Google searches. So it's not something that displays on the content of the page, but it's one of the most important parts of the site. If you want to start to, publish content on Facebook or have things automatically populate on Twitter, things like that, you end up adding a lot more content to the head tag. But right now I think we have a pretty good start. So I am going to link off to a few different Bootstrap templates that I've built, and you can kind of pick and choose the different pieces to build a site. And additionally, if there are other things that you're interested in, just search around on the documentation. make sure you're using Bootstrap 4.0. There are previous versions of Bootstrap that you will see all over the internet. You are specifically interested in 4.0. And now you're an expert. You know HTML, you know CSS, you can make beautiful Bootstrap pages and pretend to be a web developer. So I think we're all set. Oh, you're not all set. You don't know JavaScript. But guess what? You don't need to know JavaScript yet. So HTML, CSS, CSS framework, we're good to go for a decent amount of time. So good luck.